I think that for me, running is incredibly symbolic. It is a demonstration that small steps can make big change happen. My first expedition that I did, I ran across 7 deserts on 7 continents in just 7 weeks. And at the time, I had no idea how I was going to do it. All I knew was that if I took the first steps in the right direction, then I would make progress towards getting to my end goal. And I did.
You are logging kilometers, miles, obviously on the ground and meeting humanity and seeing what impact climate change is having for governance issues, increasing demand for a finite resource.
I think a lot of people make assumptions. People assume that I love to run. People assume that I'm good at running. The truth is that none of those are actually correct. I don't like running. I'm terrible at it, and it comes really hard.
We are back. Welcome to the second season of Distilled. I'm Will Sarni from Foundry, an earth finance company. I was really excited about season 1. I think you're going to love season 2. This season, we're going to do something just a little bit different. We're going to have some very unusual guests that are doing their part to solve wicked water problems. Distilled is brought to you by KTM. You can catch all of the episodes on YouTube and Spotify. Stay with us.
So I'm really fortunate in that we kicked off the season with a fabulous conversation with a friend, fellow troublemaker, Mina Guli, who is a water advocate, a ultra runner, and the founder and CEO of the Thirst Foundation. And I've known Mina for a long time, and she's been truly a driving force. Is one, she really doesn't like to run, but she believes that it's important for her to do something that's really hard to make the key point that we can all do this. We can solve water. It's not impossible. It's actually easier than you think if we just put one foot in front of each other and just forge ahead. And my key takeaway, which, is really part of why I'm absolutely in awe, if you will, of Mina, is that she connects to humanity. She takes this big issue that is really kind of invisible for most of the world and makes it very real, very tangible. So that connection between humanity and water, that's what needs to change. And Mina makes it real. Wonderful to see you. I mean, not as enjoyable as in person, but thanks so much for taking the time for this conversation. Really excited that you are kicking off season 2 of Distilled. And the timing really could not be better in terms of just really trying to catch up with you in terms of everything you did this year and where things are headed. So I really would like to just chat a little bit about, your origin story, how you got hooked on water. Obviously I know your background and your journey and your passion and commitment, but if you can share a little bit about that in terms of like how it all began, and then really want to talk to you about what did you see this year? What's your take on the world of water? And, we had a little bit of a chat. So I know you're thinking, but again, what's the state of affairs? And then, just a little bit towards the end of our conversation on what does the future of water look like? Where do you see this going? And I know that you are passionate, committed, and I'll put you in the category of an optimist because you keep plugging away, which is great. We need more of you. So tell us, how did, your journey from being an attorney to climate leadership, and then it was probably a bit of a slippery slope into the world of water, but if you can just share that with everyone, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks, Will. I think, oftentimes we look at social media, we look at what's around us, and we just see the snapshot of where we are today. We see someone standing on the top of a mountain. We see me in the middle of nowhere, running ridiculous numbers of kilometers in some pretty extreme place on the planet. And we don't appreciate what it took to get there. And I think a lot of people make assumptions. People assume that I love to run. People assume that I'm good at running. People assume that these long distance activities in, the tops of glaciers and the bottoms of rivers come easy. And the truth is that none of those are actually correct. I don't like running. I'm terrible at it, and it comes really hard. And, so I think it's obvious, it's a pretty obvious question of like, oh, how on earth did I find myself here sitting on a podcast talking to you about water and about all the crazy things that are going on in the world and the terribly sad things that are happening right now around us. And, you referenced earlier this WMO report that was just released this week, which really paints a very dire picture of the state of our planet. And the reality is I've seen it for myself, as you alluded to, and I really look forward to delving into that a bit more. But to give you a bit of a summary of how I got here in this very unusual, unexpected place, I grew up in Australia. So my first connection with water was surviving through this millennial drought, which was incredibly bad. Water was on the front page of the newspapers every day. They showed us that the levels of dams were falling. In our shopping centres, all of our fountains got replaced by plastic potted plants. And dinner table conversations were all about how to jerry-rig our washing machines to use less water in the home. So I grew up knowing that water was this incredibly important resource. But it wasn't until a conversation I had with Peter Brabeck, who was at the time the global chairman of Nestle, at the World Economic Forum, talking not about water as this thing that was really important, that was visceral and necessary for our daily lives, but that was visceral and necessary for our supply chains and our communities and our economies. Because what I'd not fully appreciated was that water goes into everything we use, we buy, and we consume every single day. Whether it's the clothes that we're wearing, snap today, or whether those of you listening and not seeing us, it turns out that Will and I both were inspired by a black turtleneck sweater when we got up this morning. So we are wearing matching outfits. Good job, Will. But, whether it's the water that goes into our awesome black sweaters today, whether it's the water that goes into producing the energy that goes into the lighting or the computers that we're speaking on, all of those things take huge amounts of water. So just as an example, the outfit I'm wearing today, Will, you're wearing, most of our listeners are wearing, just that one outfit took more water to make than all the water we drink before we're 40 years old. Just one outfit. And when I was sitting there having this conversation with Peter, thinking about what that meant, not only for every one of us, but for all the multiple versions of our outfits that we have in our closets and the billions of people around the world, and listen to him saying that our demand for water is growing twice as fast as our population is growing, I suddenly thought, this is messed up, right? This is really messed up, because it's not only that our demand for water is growing, it's that the amount of water on the planet is stable, and all the statistics demonstrate that over the next, even 5-10 years, even right now, we are having a dire situation with being able to access enough water for us to continue to grow and to continue to lead the lifestyles that we're leading. So I decided I had to do something about it. And at the time, we started with educating kids in China. We educated a couple of million kids across China. I didn't get imprisoned. I didn't get thrown out of the country. Instead, it was actually embraced by hundreds and hundreds of schools across the country to say, how can we actually get these kids to understand what their water footprint is? How can we get these kids to understand the importance and value of water in their daily lives? And how can we get these kids to help us to build a movement for change? But what I realized was that mobilizing kids today is not going to happen fast enough to create the change we need for tomorrow, and to ensure that those kids have a world that they can grow into where their hopes and dreams can come true, and they're not limited by their ability to access water. So we started thinking, how can we think outside the box? How can we create an accelerant? And what can we do to create big global attention? How can we use the media to distribute our messages? Mm-hmm. And we decided I had to do something completely crazy and ridiculous. We decided that we had to do something which connected the decision makers to the problems out there, because I think a lot of the time these people who are making decisions don't understand that what's happening in a boardroom, what's happening at home when they turn on the tap and water comes out, is not true for most of the population.
Right.
And so we said, well, what would happen if we could combine some crazy big physical stunt that will grab media attention and would help us to bridge this gap between what's in inverted commas out there and what's inside the boardrooms and the halls of power of government. And so we came up with this idea that I would go to the front lines of this water crisis and I would work with local communities to tell those stories. And so that's how the running thing was born. Ironically, without me really kind of liking the running pack.
So, when I first met you, I naturally made the assumption, okay, so, here's someone who loves to run, has been doing it, since the age of 5, and learning that you just picked running and that's what you do, even though you don't love it. And, now that I hear you talk about it, in some ways it makes sense. You're doing hard work for a hard cause and really driving attention to it in a way that is very personal. You and I have talked about this. You are logging kilometers, miles, obviously on the ground and meeting humanity and seeing what impact climate change is having, poor governance issues, increasing demand for a finite resource. So, that journey from, hey, this is a really good idea and I really don't like running, to I think I'm just going to keep running and connect with humanity in a very, visceral way.
Yeah, I think that for me, running is incredibly symbolic. It is a demonstration that small steps can make big change happen. It's a demonstration that sometimes when we set a big, bold, audacious goal, like running, my first expedition that I did, I ran across 7 deserts on 7 continents in just 7 weeks. And at the time, I had no idea how I was going to do it. All I knew was that if I took the first steps in the right direction, then I would make progress towards getting to my end goal. And I did. And that's kind of a bit of a mantra that I've held for all of the expeditions that I've done, whether it's been trying to run 100 marathons in 100 days, and we can talk about that because that didn't work out so well. Or maybe it did. And then last year, running 200 marathons in 32 countries in the lead up to the UN's first conference on water in almost 50 years, which most of your listeners will be very familiar with. All of those things seem incredibly daunting at the time we come up with them. But the truth is that we can do these hard things. We can set these big, bold, audacious goals, whether it's running ridiculous numbers of kilometers or whether it is committing to the things that are needed to be done to solve our global water crisis. And I think a bit of the piece that's missing in this water conversation at the moment is this drive to say, we can do more. Do we really go to bed at the end of the night and look at ourselves in the mirror and say we did all we could to avert this water crisis? The answer is no, Will. The answer is no. Most of us here, most of us listening cannot do that. And that's for me, having seen what I've seen, knowing what we're capable of doing and know we're capable of so much more, it's just an unacceptable state to be in. And the truth is that the planet is reflecting that. It's in a dire, horrible physical state and people are suffering. And most importantly, the next generation is going to suffer. And that's not fair. And that's not a world I'm prepared to live in or live with or just kind of sit back on a couch and go, I don't like running, but that's okay. I'm not going to do this anymore because,
Right.
It's someone else's problem. Water isn't someone else's problem. Water is our problem too.
So, I'll hold on to, you are an optimist in my view because you persist and you keep going. And, I love the, characterization that you put one foot in front of the other and you just keep going. I also put you in the category and take this as a compliment of being an unreasonable person because we can do better. I believe we can do better. And, I want to say that, the people that we associate with Mina share that point of view. We're not complacent. We're not happy. We wake up every morning and it's not a job. It is a calling. And that's important. And we need to get more people on board with that. As you know, So, Mina, tell me.
Well, I'm going to. I agree with you, but we need to get more of the right people too. So we can't be our lone rangers shouting in the wilderness anymore. The time for that is gone. What we need to do is to come together to break down our silos and say, how can we get those decision makers that are able to make the decisions that are needed to actually be as passionate about this issue? First of all, to be less water blind, to see the issue, to understand it's urgent, and to understand that to do nothing is a criminal offense and the only option is to do something. Somehow we need to get those decision makers to see that.
So, not that this is pushing back, but, well, a couple of things. One, I agree with you.
Will. I love it.
Well, I will, but I want to, I want to ramp up to that. Mina, give me a minute. I endeavor to be polite. So
why start now, Will?
Why start now? That's good. That's so great, by the way. Look, I agree with you. We need to stop going to the usual venues and speaking to the usual suspects on the usual topics and all of that. It's an echo chamber. Completely agree with you on that. I also agree with you that, yes, in quotes, we need decision makers to understand what the issues are. The only thing I would add, and it's maybe not a pushback, is that I believe civil society will change public policy and it'll change decision makers in, whether it's corporations or investors or whatever. So one of the things I love about what you're doing is you are engaging with civil society. You are showing up and engaging with people on the topic of water in a very, very connected way by running, by being on the ground. And so for me, that's the lever to get decision makers to care, because they're not going to look, there could be a million reports, there could be a million talking heads. The reality is, if people, consumers, customers, voters, investors care and apply, pressure or lever to pull, whatever it may be, then I think that decision makers might start to care more than they do, because right now we're failing miserably, to your point.
Yeah,
so that's my only fine point on it.
Yeah, I think that's right, Will. I think my big reality was, I think a couple of comments just on that. I think that if we consistently rely on these cold, hard numbers on a page, the can will be kicked down the road, because decision makers don't connect to them empathetically. It doesn't become a priority. It becomes one of those things that we can, do tomorrow or the next day. And in a world of competing priorities, water gets shoved down the agenda. So I think we need civil society. We all have a responsibility to tell our story, to shout it from the rooftop, and to demonstrate that we do care about this issue, and that water is not someone else's problem. It's all of our problems. And so I think that's the first thing that is my big reality check of the power of storytelling and the power of humans to connect to one another. And I think the second thing is just realizing how much momentum is out there. I alluded before to this, to one of the expeditions that I did, which was to try to run 100 marathons in 100 days. And I wanted to demonstrate to the world what it meant to be 100% committed to something. In my case, obviously, water. And it was a great expedition. We went to the RLC. I ran through these desert sands where there were these big hulking carcasses of boats that had been used as fishing boats for many, many years. And indeed, the fishermen who used to sail those boats are still alive and still living in the port. That is now no longer a port. It is literally a town in the middle of a desert. And, from there, we ran through rivers that should have been filled with water. So many things that I saw at the front lines of this water crisis, but unbeknownst to me at the time, but very clearly beknownst to me very quickly, was that I was suffering from a stress fracture in my femur, which progressed to the point which I could no longer run. I could only hobble. Then I could only literally hold myself up on my walking sticks. And on day number 62, I realized that we had a problem. Day 63, we went to the hospital in Cape Town. got a scan and discovered that I had a 15 centimeter fracture in my femur. And to be honest, Will, I felt my whole world crashing down around me. I was incredibly broken mentally and emotionally, physically, obviously, but I just felt like I'd let down the whole water community. I'd let down all the people I'd met. I'd let down the people I hadn't met. I'd let down the world because I'd wanted, all I want to do with my life is to solve this global water crisis. It's why I run. It's why I do hard things. It's why I do all of the things that I do, even though they are hard and difficult and I don't enjoy them. But I'm 100% committed to saying, what can we do to solve this problem before I die? And I thought to myself, I've failed. Like, this is a cataclysmic failure. And on day 63, as I was sitting there in my wheelchair, just literally tears pouring down my face, all I could see was blackness. My team came in and they said to me, what we have seen is what you have seen. And what we feel is that we can do something about this too. So they said, why don't we take your miles for you today? You can't run, but we can. So on day 63, they went out and they ran and they shot a short social video that they put online, and they said, Mina is broken and she can't run, so we're running for her. Come and join us.
I didn't know that.
And on day 64, people from across Cape Town turned up to run for me. But the truth is, not running for me is running for water, to share their own personal stories and how they're connected to this crisis, what it meant to live through day zero, what it means to have access to water. And as they ran, they also put up social videos and people around the world started to run with them. And by the time we got to day 64, 65, 66, there were more and more people across the world stepping up to share their water stories and to run alongside of us. And by the time we got to day 100, we had not run 100 marathons in 100 days. We had run thousands and thousands more across the world with people everywhere stepping up and saying water is not someone else's problem, it's our problem too, and we're stepping up, not only to raise awareness, but to demonstrate urgency and to demand action. And by the time I started running my 200 marathons a year and a bit ago, we had, I was not standing in the middle of a desert and I was not standing on the starting line all by myself. I was surrounded by people across the planet. And since that day, Will, we have built the biggest global grassroots movement on water in history. We have people in over 200 countries and territories stepping up, sharing their stories and getting involved in this whole campaign towards a better planet for all of us and for the next generation. And I think that's the power of these things. Like, sometimes when you take a small step, you have no idea where it's going to go. But as long as you're headed broadly in the right direction, amazing things can happen. You provide a platform for people, you provide an opportunity for people, and you honestly can create change. Someone said to me when I was in the middle of one of my campaigns, individually, you can make an impact. But when we work together, we truly can change the world. They're right, and I've seen it.
I agree with you. And I have an idea for you, by the way. Now that you've mobilized the running community, you know where I'm going with this. I think you can mobilize the rowing community. And by the way, I was on a call this morning with a friend, and they said that they're into rowing. And I said, well, I scull. And it's like, I realize now every time I say I scull, I row, it's like I have to use the hand movement. So I'm happy to see you do that. But, it's interesting. A small bit of this is that getting my rowing community, my rowing club excited about what you're doing was a huge leap forward, Mina. It was like, oh my goodness, here's this woman dedicated to increasing awareness on some of these pressing issues. And not that they take for granted, but they row on the water. And, opening up the aperture and getting people to understand your cause and your commitment and aligning with that, that was a big leap forward. So you inspired my little world here. And I want to say we're going to run with it or we're going to row with it, but we're going to amp that up. So, thanks for, inspiring my little world. I want to come back to so when you ran the Seine in advance to the Olympics, could you share what you saw and how that went on the ground? And I saw some of the social media posts, which, again, were inspiring. But if you can just share a little bit about that as a way to maybe tie into, our conversation that we had about, the state of the world, which is not good. So just give us an update on that. And then I want to talk to you about what's next for you in terms of, you work with, your foundation and WWF and some of your other sponsors, and then we'll talk about the future of water.
Yeah. So when we finished running the 200 marathons, obviously I had this incredible snapshot of what's going on around the world. I had run 200 marathons. I'd run at the tops of glaciers up in Central Asia, and I'd witnessed firsthand just the incredible amount of glacial melt that's been happening. I'd talked to herders who were going up to the mountains months earlier than they ever had before and coming down months later just because the weather has completely changed. We saw bridges washed away with these mass floods. I've been to places where the devastation of the impact of climate felt through water has been so completely obvious. And as we said before, these are not cold, hard numbers on a page. These are real people in real places suffering the real consequences. And I think that really demonstrated to me that one of the critical elements of our nature-based infrastructure that we have ignored, that we have treated literally like a sewer or like a pipeline or like something to just dispose of our waste, is our rivers. And yet our rivers are on the front lines of this water crisis. They're on the front lines of our climate crisis. They're on the front lines of our food and our energy crisis. Ran through to Lake Powell in the United States, where the levels of water were so low. There's a place called the Lone Rock. Those of you in America will know that the Lone Rock, and it used to be surrounded by water. And we met one of the local park rangers who said to us, when I was a kid, the guy probably around about the same age as me, so only halfway through our lives, just putting it, in a nice way. He said to me, when I was a kid, 20, 30 years ago, I took my kayak and we went out boating to the Lone Rock. And he said, when you go out there, you'll be able to run there. And sure enough, that afternoon, I went and I ran to Lone Rock.
Wow.
Right. This is Lake Powell. This is, Lake Mead, where you saw the stories in the newspapers about how low the water levels were and people finding dead bodies and all kinds of exciting things at the bottom of the lake. But the truth is not exciting. It's incredibly sad and incredibly confronting. And, particularly when you think about the importance of places like Lake Mead and Lake Powell to generate power. And when you talk to people who are talking for the first time about the reality of the potential for dead pooling in those energy production facilities, which means that there's just not enough water going into the reservoirs. There's not enough water in the reservoirs to be able to support the production of power. That is a very, very bad situation. So it seemed to me that we needed to do something to raise the profile of not only our rivers, but their value and the importance to all of us everywhere and to everything we hold dear to our lives. And so I thought, what would happen if we started a campaign to elevate the importance of our rivers and our waterways, to demonstrate the value that they have and to demonstrate the dire situation that they're in. And if we use that as a mechanism to say, let's drive action by governments, by companies, and by individuals to protect, preserve, and restore our river systems. So the first one we decided to do, which is pretty obvious when I think about it, was the Seine, just because it had such a high profile leading into the Olympics, but also because I'm tired of always talking about doom and gloom. Will, you're right, I am an optimist, because optimism is the only solution. Negativity, always believing that we will fail, always believing that this terrible status quo that we have is what we have to accept as the future. No way, right? We need things to change. And I said, what would happen if we started to tell some more positive stories? What would happen if we went to somewhere like the Seine, which back in the 1970s was declared functionally dead with only 3 species of fish alive in it? And we looked at it and we said, we've gone from the 1970s to here in 2024 where for the first time, all these Olympic events are going to be held in the Seine, where it's become the cornerstone of one of the greatest sporting events in our lives, that comes around every 4 years. And what would happen if we actually showcase the power of what's possible? Because I think sometimes the other thing with positivity is we can talk a positive game, but until people see the possibility of what is achievable and they actually see the pathway to get there, it's very hard to take them. And whether it's me going and running crazy distances and being able to sit in a boardroom with a CEO and have a conversation and being able to respond to them when they start saying, oh, it's all too hard, I've got so many competing priorities, I've got so many other things. And I look at them and I look them dead in the eye and I say, are you seriously going to tell me that what you're doing here is too hard? You're going to tell me this, who has seen what I've seen and who is doing what I do? And I think the conversation dramatically changes at that point, because the truth is a lot of these things aren't too hard. They just require us to be committed. They just require us to see a pathway forward and to realize we're not alone, that we have a community of people that is supporting us, that the risks are not what we think they are, that they're actually much less, and we can actually sit there and work together and drive change. And I think for me that the rationale for running down the Seine became completely obvious. So
Right.
I ran from the source of the Seine all the way down to the sea. And what I saw was not this river in distress, but a river that was flourishing, and communities that were flourishing, agricultural production, we met people who were driving barges up and down the river, taking huge amounts of either agricultural products or other commercial products up and down the river. Just an incredible story of how a commitment by a government to a big, bold, audacious goal to, in inverted commas, fix this river, took them from dead to where we are today, the cornerstone of the Olympic Games, in a relatively short period of time. I think demonstrating the art of what's possible is critical to bringing people along the journey.
Completely agree with you. Completely. What does the future hold? Is it more of this engagement with civil society? Is it, greater engagement with corporations? I mean, just, a real quick, if you had to just say, this is where we need to be and this is where the future should go, what would that sound like?
Yeah. Well, I think we make it out like it's a complicated thing. It's really simple.
No, you're
right.
I
think one of the problems that we have in the water space is, when I started asking people about this, and yes, you rightly pointed out at the beginning of this conversation, I started in water actually through climate. My whole background was in climate change and broader sustainability questions. And every time I got asked questions about water, trying to upskill myself, the first thing was people would suck air through their teeth. Oh, Mina, it's very complicated. It's very complicated. And I'm how complicated? We've got a problem. We need to find a solution. How hard is it? I mean, appreciating the complexities, yes, of course, it is complicated and it is challenging, but everything is. And at some point, we've got to stop using complicated as an excuse. No excuses. One of my mottos is #no excuses. We need...
Okay, so that's the future. That's the future. No excuses. Let's get it done.
Well, yes, that's a tool. I think the future that I would like to see is where water is at the top of every government, business, corporate agenda. It's got to be at the top of consideration in the finance sector, in the environmental sector. Too often water is swept under the rug. I've said before, water is everything, but we've treated it for too long as if it's nothing. That has to change. And that has to change fundamentally across everywhere. And I think that if we move water to become central to all of these things, then we will start to create solutions and we will get closer to achieving all the SDGs, because water is the key to unlocking, achieving all of them. And unfortunately, because we have disenfranchised it effectively, we have got to a point where we're not going to achieve a lot of these things, where water is impacting our ability to deliver on our energy, our climate, and our broader environmental goals. I think that has to change.
Thank you. And I agree with you completely on that. It has to be the center. And, one thing I would add to that is it's so part of humanity. I'm tired of hearing people talk about the water industry, the water sector. And I really believe what you're doing and where we need to go is we need to change humanity's relationship with water. I mean, it is just so central to everything, and we abuse it relentlessly.
Yeah, well, I think we also need to change the water sector's relationship with water, where we too often think about water comes from a tap. Water doesn't come from a tap. Water comes from a natural ecosystem. These pipes and these pipelines that we create, they come from somewhere. It doesn't just magically appear out of thin air. And I think that as a community, we need to stop thinking in silos. We need to stop thinking, I'm in the utility business, or I'm in the environmental sector. I'm an environmental NGO. I'm on this. No way. Time is gone for that. We need to come together. We need to unite, and we need to say we're all interested in the same thing, which is enough water for everyone forever. That is the truth. And until we break down these silos and these power bases and this infighting and this whole kind of, this environment where it's a little bit dog eat dog, until that goes, we will continue to have a water problem. But as soon as we unite and we start moving in the same direction, incredible things will happen. And I know because even just looking at this community that we've built, where everybody is interested in the same outcome, enough water for everyone forever, the dream is that we can solve this in our lifetime. And I truly think we have the mechanics to do it. We just need the glue to stick it together.
I agree. I can't wait to see you at a conference and we both get up and just call everyone out on it, which we will do. We haven't done it together, but we've done it separately. So Mina, a million thanks for being on. It really, I can't overstate this, how significant, important this was, for us and for me in terms of having you on and your voice. So the call to action, Mina, how do people connect with you? How do people become part of your movement? And, we'll follow up with content and all that, but, just real quick, tell us about your foundation. How do people get involved? How do people take that first step?
So I think the most important thing is that everyone has a role to play. And I think that, I say the name of our campaign is Run Blue. So if anyone wants to follow along, please follow along Run Blue. Or you can follow me and the crazy stories and the crazy life that I have at the moment, not anything that I expected. But the reality, Will, is that I think it is, I've said this a couple of times, even on this podcast, it's very easy to look at water as being something really big and really complicated. It's really easy to look at it as someone else's challenge to solve. We all use and interact with water every single day. And that means we all have a role to play in creating and finding solutions. So it doesn't matter what you do in your life, in your home, in your daily decisions, in your company, in your organizations, or in your rowing club, Will. All I will ask everybody to do is to think what you can do to run blue, to take that first step in water, whether it's turning off the tap when you brush your teeth, whether it's taking shorter showers, whether it's reducing your food waste at home, or whether it's figuring out how to get your company to engage in one of our runs. And I will say, right, Will, the thing that you pointed out with your Rocky Mountain Rowing Club is it took one person to raise the idea, to your rowing club, of maybe we can do something for water. And just by getting them involved in a campaign where they could do the things that they love, but still get exposed to these issues, instantly they changed their whole attitude to their relationship with water and appreciated the value of this thing that they'd taken for granted every single day. And I've seen that happen not only in clubs, whether it's running clubs or rowing clubs, but also in companies. And the ability to get our corporate friends and colleagues around us to start to step up and do something fun, like participate in one of our virtual runs, or come run with me when I'm actually doing one of my runs, that opportunity to get people to tell their stories can create a shift all the way up through the organization as people in decision-making power realize how important this is to all of those right throughout the supply chains. So I would also say never underestimate the power of one small step, the power of a word, or the power of an ability to recruit others to a cause. And I think for me, like the ask or the call to action is just to think, what is your first step? What is your personal one thing that you can do to run blue? You, your organization, your company, your colleagues, your friends, your companions, your household.
Mina, you nailed it. You might even get me to run one day. We'll see, though. But we'll chat about that offline.
Oh, no,
Mina,
Will, I want you to make a commitment now, please.
Oh, I'll
In
run
public.
with you. Sure.
Done.
Okay.
Colorado.
But,
Source to see.
okay. You have a deal. You have a date. Let me know when, so I can block out not just the run, but the months of recovery that I'll need. But you let me know. I've declared it online, so I'll do it.
We've distilled the issue into the answer. Will run.
Oh man, I could see a hashtag with that one, Mina. Thank you. Mina, thanks. Really, this was terrific and inspiring. So thanks so much. You take care.
Thank you, Will, and thank you. A big thank you for putting together this podcast. I think it's incredibly important to raise the voices, to make this much more personal. This issue can really, I think, fall between the cracks in many ways. And the more we can get people speaking out about it, talking about some of the issues and concerns, but also talking about some of the positive examples, I think the better. So thank you for being a leader, for stepping up and making this happen. And for bringing us all together in one place to distill the issues of water.
Back at you, Mina. Thank you. You made me blush. All right, good. Well, you take care of yourself. Bye.
Bye, Will.